was in section 15. It's balanced, but basically reflects the transfers that are needed for public safety and probation at this time from the general fund. So that's a new and revised version, and then there's a revised tobacco settlement and non-departmental budget. Those go in section 2. And the auditor is section 3, recorder, clerk recorder, section 4. It's a lot of information, but this is where we are today.
Okay. Just a quick question. So the economic development housing indicates a negative figure for the projected balance. Is that
I can address that. Yes, it does. You'll notice that we begin the year in that's the 112 fund with a negative fund balance of $510,000. And through the discussions at the budget committee, we adopted a strategy to try to bring that negative fund balance to zero over maybe the next 2 or 3 years. And so this year we project a gain of $117,900, with a projected ending balance of $392,000 in the red rather than $510 at the beginning. So that's the strategy we employed. This is one of the areas that I would like to revisit during the year in our mid-year review to see if there's ways we can further reduce that negative fund balance. I'm sorry. That occurred over, Julie can help me, I think over the last 3 or 4 years. Essentially the Economic Development Housing 112 Fund originated many years ago to account for the grant-funded portion of the planning department, CDBG, home, whatever sorts of economic development grants we could get. As it has turned out over the last number of years, that function costs more than it brings in, to the tune of somewhere, changes every year, but 100 to 200,000 a year, because not all of those expenses are reimbursable through grants, and there are activities. That activity generates some liability that is not covered by the grants often, and so that's how it has evolved into that negative $510,000 balance.
Richard, is that mostly staff time, or is that unpaid liability, or?
It's a combination of everything. I think largely it is staff time and staff cost. Within this budget, there's projected up $100,000 of uninsured liability that has been incurred. Likely
the program will work fine but we're not getting enough grants out to cover the overhead. So
I understand.
That's something that I also hope we could. I know. Like I was really excited about it a couple years back, and Jim knew a lot of history, and he wasn't quite as excited as I was.
No, actually, the board has been divided. I asked to answer the question how it got there. Is the board was divided. It wasn't unanimous.
Right.
2 of us, Brian and I in particular, were critical of this program. We were basically sold a bill of goods. We were told by staff, oh, there's pie in the sky, we can do all these things, and the board gave them a lot of rope to go out there and supposedly do good. They would budget, oh, we're going to get 200,000 or 100,000 in revenue, and they'd get 30,000, and so we'd eat another 70,000 at the end of the year. We just kind of move it over, and so cumulatively that built up probably over, I wouldn't say 3 or 4 years, probably over 8 or 10 years. And finally, not only did the board get tired of it, but the community got tired of being sold a bill of goods. I mean, a lot of promises were made, but none of them were realistic. And the idea was, oh, we're going to have this, Emerald City all of a sudden is going to evolve, and it's going to generate all this revenue and cash flow that will retire whatever debt that they extended to begin with. It was bogus, and some of us said so at the beginning.
There are a lot of instances where the grant funding model leaves the county holding the bag, and what I mean by that is that we go out and apply for a grant to do a certain program, and that program would be reimbursable if it works according to plan. But for the board's aware of the example where we had a housing rehabilitation grant program where we applied for the grant, got the grant, went to implement the grant, and for a variety of reasons there were no takers for that money,
Or nobody qualified.
or they didn't qualify. And so in that instance, we've expended the funds to implement the program, but it's, now that we don't have any takers, it's not reimbursable. And I think that is in large part how this accumulates.
So if we look at the qualifications a little closer, maybe, that might help that situation.
Certainly, scrutinizing the programs is important, but it's not really up to the county in a lot of cases, the criteria of the program. It's kind of.
I get that, but I mean, if we examine the program and say, you know, people aren't gonna qualify for this, why should we even attempt this?
Absolutely.
Before we get into it?
I'd like to suggest that we, because, yeah, I certainly don't wanna, see a
Negative.
200 grand, negative, you know, part of our structure go on autopilot forever and ever, so.
Right.
I think we should, well, if nothing else, we're gonna fill up some future agendas because of this. So I think we should
Absolutely.
agendize that as well, in the
Absolutely.
very near future, and really, look at the validity of it, and if it is valid, we continue. And if, you know, we weigh out everything, the pros and cons, what's the actual cost, what are we getting for the cost, I mean, you know, a 200 grand negative isn't a big deal if you're employing like, you know, 35 people. So you gotta quantify all that.
That's what I was
The
getting
reality,
at, yeah.
Tom, is that programs weren't feasible, and everybody
Yeah.
thought it was free money, so, you know, the board included was slapped on the back, you know, you can't let this free money go, and the state sat there and made you believe that, but in reality, it was free money, it was your money, and if you ran your business that way, you would have been toes up years before this program, you know, hit the skids, but, you know, you have to be smart about it, and I don't think that the county was very smart.
So we can have a look at
Yeah,
that.
we don't want to
Sure.
repeat those
Okay.
mistakes.
Yeah.
I think,
We had
The
county
board's aware of my
administration
opinions on
that was
it.
supposed to be the guardian of the chicken coop, and they were some of the biggest proponents of this, so people we thought were tending to business turned out not to be, they were as much the culprit.
That's why we have Richard.
That's why it took us a few to get there, and Richard, I think Richard understands it, I don't think we're gonna have that problem in the future.
Are there any questions of Julie's presentation? Any other questions? I'd just like to say I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be part of the budget committee this year. It was my first time serving on there. It was enjoyed serving with you, Bob. Yeah, it was very enlightening and extremely informative, and I mean, you know, people don't realize what a tough situation the county has been put in by the state. And, I mean, if you want to liken it to having your own business and having sources outside of your control, you know, cut your income and just pile on expenses, that's kind of what the county government is in a nutshell. I mean, it's just crazy, absolutely crazy. But obviously, you know, we can't print money. And
then you
yeah.
duplicate budgeting for it, and it makes it even crazier.
Oh, you're always looking for an opportunity. But no, and it was, anyhow, I'm just grateful for the opportunity. I'm glad I got a chance to do it, and it really gave me a good insight to it. And it's amazing that the county continues to do as well as it hasn't done, faced with those obstacles completely outside of our control. It's just a crazy way to try to balance it. So anyhow, if there's no other questions of Julie's report, I'm going to go to the public, and I have a speaker card. I'll take
I
up
have one
first.
question for Julie, if you could,
Yeah.
maybe for Richard. On the revised sheets, and this is dealing with this one right here, and at the bottom, when you get down to it, it has the projected balance, $19,336,813 that we're not going to be spending this fiscal year. Can we get that summarized into where those monies are basically, I mean, you can go through and pick out out of this sheet, but could we just get one page that lists the available funding pots that we have that are not gonna be utilized, that we're expecting to be part of future budget scenarios?
Are you
Okay.
talking about restricted funds or unrestricted funds?
Both. I think we need to have a list of the funds that are there and the ones that are unrestricted. I'd like to see not only that, but also which funds are reoccurring funds and which funds are one-time only funds. In other words, we're holding the, maybe it might be, 3 million of that could be like road projects that, it takes 2-3 budget cycles for a road project to be completed. So, until they get to the point where they actually lay the asphalt and do that, they have to hold that up, you hold it, off to the side. So the monies that are put kind of on the side and is being held for one reason or another, I like to see that broken down.
And I guess maybe the best way to do that would be a listing of every fund as of year end,
Right.
once all the accruals
I mean,
have been.
we've got money, kind of sitting in reserve accounts or side accounts. We parked money into the Teeter Fund, we parked money into Trendell, and, those kind of, I like to see, and that is, in essence, makes up the core of that, not all of it, but the core of that $19 million that we're not gonna be expending.
Well, I believe the auditor could run correct me if I'm wrong, a fund balance after, a year-end fund balance after the accruals have been accounted for.
Okay, that would be helpful.
I
But
think-
but if she could run that, and if you could convert that to us, maybe a spreadsheet that's one page that has kind of what the general breakdown is, so that it'd be easy to understand. We get a lot of reports, and I appreciate all the printouts we get from the auditor's office and from Julie, and their volumes at times. But you almost have to be a rocket scientist to be able to interpret that. So can we take those documents that we'll continue to get, and maybe one of the rocket scientists on staff can summarize it onto one page so that a layperson can understand it more effectively?
I think we could run a after accrual
Yeah.
year-end fund. and
Summary,
we can
Richard.
Yeah, we can do that.
Just a summary.
Yeah. We don't need the detail, just.
Yeah, just a summary.
Yeah.
That would help me,
Yeah,
that would help me.
well, I think it would paint a better picture.
Yeah,
That's of the fund balances, right?
right.
You wanted the total.
I just, yeah, I want a quantification of all of our money, where it's at, how it's being utilized. This here represents about 80% of it. Let's deal with the other 20% that we're not gonna be using at this point in time. And there's reasons why we don't use it. I'm not saying that it's money that's not being used. It's gonna be used, but it's not being programmed to be used this year.
When we have the sheet, then it'll be separated, restricted and unrestricted,
Yeah.
I think. So you do that.
Yeah.
It'll be very similar to the one that Julie gave you in your budget packet, budget binder to start out with.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it would be like this one right here. This is my favorite page in the whole book, this one right here.
And that report is also in the audit every year also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen it there, but I was gonna say, if we could take and get one that shows those monies, that would be great.
Okay, we're gonna go to public comment now. I'm gonna take speaker card first from Kenneth Bunch.
Kenneth Bunch, Lassen County Assessor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for this opportunity to discuss a request that I had in my budget this year. That was the reinstatement of a real property appraiser. A few years ago, during very rough budget times, that position was eliminated. A little history on the staffing of the office. I came to work over a year after Prop 13 passed. We had 18 positions in my office at that time. When I became the assessor in December 1987, had 12 and a half. Over the years, even though the mission and the laws and the mandates and the sheer volume of work increased, we were able to scale down to 10 and a half positions, kind of a skeleton crew, you might say. And then the budget priorities were such that many departments had to have some layoffs. My department participated in that. We laid off 25% of my real property staff. You eliminate 25% of your real property appraisers, I should have said, it definitely has an impact on your department. We entered into the real estate crisis in a big way. We're coming back out of it. At this point, this is the first assessment roll I've delivered that's actually a positive, not by much, but we had 4 in a row that went negative, just like most counties in California. But we also are experiencing transition in our office. I'll be leaving. We have 3 senior employees that are reaching retirement age. It's time to gear up again and get the appropriate level of staffing in place. I was asked to put my thoughts in writing at the budget committee. I did that. I don't know if that write-up ended up in your budget packet or not. But the discussion in the budget committee had a whole lot to do with revenue. And assessors, probably being political animals, elected officials that we are, we don't like to talk about revenue too much. We like to talk about fairness and equity, competency, getting the job done timely, completely. So again, part of my request here is on behalf of my constituents. There's an unacceptable amount of time it takes to get things done sometimes. A fellow might buy a house, if you want to get the paperwork, the bill, the corrections, the refunds sometimes for a long time. We haven't been able to deliver the assessment roll on time. We've been having to ask for an extension. That's complicated the budget process somewhat. It does follow though, you have more men in the field, more people working. You will discover these properties built without a permit or equipment bought, pivots bought, whatever, that somebody has not reported. And those people that do take out building permits and do fill out their property statements appropriately and ethically shouldn't feel they're penalized because somebody who doesn't do the paperwork doesn't pay their fair share of taxes. So I realize that, every budget is a examination of priorities, and I know that this year you are making some increases in other departments. But again, I would like the whole board, if they could, find some money to reinstate this position. Any questions?
Any questions of board members?
All right, thank you very much.
Eileen, you had your hand up. Did you want to go from this side?
Yes, I did. I hope the public will have an opportunity to examine your budget a little bit further than just itemizing. I'm doing this type of meeting. I don't know if this is your final meeting. I hope not. But I have a question on the supervisors' salaries and wages, Fund 100, Budget Unit 0011. There's a 2,382 increase in the salaries of the Board of Supervisors. Could you explain that?
I'm sorry.
You've increased the board's salaries $2,382 for this fiscal year.
Okay, for the 2013-14 year that we just ended, the final budget, the actuals was $272,000 for salaries and benefits, and my recommendation is $277,200. Is that the line you're talking about?
Line 100.
The top, just the salaries.
Yeah.
Just the salary.
No, just not
So-
the breakdown of the benefits.
Okay, so so we show a final budget last year of $189,000 and this year $186,000. Is that the line you're looking at?
Well, you have estimated you have budget and then you have estimated actuals. I'm assuming
Correct.
those are actuals when this was printed.
The estimated actuals are the ending fund balances plus or minus any accruals that the auditors had adjusted for. So it's not necessarily the cash balance, but it's the accrual balance that we anticipate at the end of the year.
Okay, so you made the 186,297 budget.
That.
You did,
Yes.
okay. I have a question about the ACO account, Fund 119, budget line 1191. We had this issue this year about the generator. And I know there was some talk about moving that around. It appears $126,000 in the new fiscal budget. Was that a mistake, or have we not purchased the generator?
The generator has not been purchased, and it is anticipated to be purchased in this.
And so you have moved it into the ACO, which is what we talked about before. I have some concerns, or not me, other people, have concerns about the courthouse expense. You don't seem to have, in all the budget items, or budget funds, you don't really have, you haven't budgeted anything for the courthouse renovation, other than a re-roof for $25,000. Are you just gonna skip courthouse renovations for this fiscal year?
No, as I mentioned to the board on the 22nd, this budget doesn't anticipate any funding of capital improvements plan. I expect to come back to the board mid-year, once the capital improvement plan has been completed, with a financing plan, and that may or may not include recommendations to amend this budget.
Okay, so presently, you're waiting for the capital improvement plan to be, that's a good idea, that's a great idea.
There are a few capital items that are included in it.
I noticed that, yeah. The Fund 185 is CCF equipment replacement. I have a question about the equipment, $190,230. I don't have page numbers on here. Is that for the new control system?
Did you say the best unit
Fund 185, budget 0540, and it's the equipment line item.
I may ask, since we have the sheriff and undersheriff.
Oh, yes, Grant, Richard.
Oh,
The Homeland grants, that's where this project's been funded.
okay.
So that's for the control?
No,
No, it
The
isn't.
control panels are budgeted in, I believe it's the 151.
151?
I think the control panels are in ACO.
Are they in ACO?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
So is that the $300,000 that you have budgeted then?
It's likely going to be more than that. There's the 200 and the 300 right next to each other.
Building improvement and equipment?
Right, because I'm not sure what the breakdown is going to be between those two lines. There'll be certainly some infrastructure and some equipment, so that's the space holder to help accomplish that.
Okay. I know in the past, because I have last year's budget here also, in the past you have a tendency to put amounts of money, and year after year, the money just stays there and you never spend it on especially capital outlay things. I'm really sincerely hoping that once the capital improvement plan is finished and published, that these things will be actually spent and done. They don't just sit there year after year after year. And we have, our group is really watching very closely getting the control panel done, and I know it's,
I just hope it doesn't go out before you, I mean, that's our hope, is it doesn't crash before we get it done. That would be catastrophic. So we're gonna watch that courthouse construction and the jail, central control system being completed, or not completed. So those are the big things. Personally, I'm watching animal control myself, and getting the, I have invested time and money into getting that upgrade done, and it really seems to have stalled, even though now there's $40,000 in the budget. With the present climate, it doesn't appear that, it appears that politics will keep that from getting done. So I will be back personally for that item, because like I said, I've invested money and time into this project, but it doesn't look good for those kennels to get upgraded and be functional. So that's, I hope there'll be one more budget hearing, because there are other issues that have since changed. They've been updated, so we'd like an opportunity then to discuss the latest numbers that have just changed. So, and I know it's it's still on topic, but the $510,000, nobody wants to say Hurlong, nobody wants to say Bertati, nobody wants to say misspent money. But when you spend that much money on staff salaries, which you've admitted again today, I sincerely hope that this board or any future board doesn't ever let that happen again. Because the $510,000 is Hurlong. And I know you're afraid to say it didn't come up, but it's Hurlong.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make one point about the control boards in the jail, and I think the sheriff is currently working on an RFP and planning on getting that done very soon. One point about the funding source is, however, that we, as the board knows, we have a courthouse construction fund where certain fines go into, and that fund has been accumulating. At some point in the past, Lassen and Los Angeles County, I believe, if I'm correct, got some legislation passed that would allow those two counties to transfer the money from the courthouse construction fund to the criminal justice facilities trust fund. And that fund, eligible uses are things like the jail and any other criminal justice related facilities, juvenile hall, for example. The reason I'm mentioning this is there's a debate right now whether or not that money can still be transferred. There's $700-ish thousand in that fund could be transferred to the criminal justice facilities fund, and we're exploring whether or not that's an appropriate transfer or not. If it is, that would free up that money to be used on things like the control boards, and I would likely come back with a recommendation to fund that out of there rather than ACO. I know the auditor's been talking with the state. There may be an issue of having to return that money or use it for some other purpose that we can't envision now, because we don't really have courthouse facilities that we're funding at this point. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that we're exploring that issue, and if that comes to pass, that would free up an opportunity to fund this. But
Can that money be used for the maintenance of effort that we're required to pay the state for the new courthouse?
No. No.
What's the odds of us retaining that money?
I don't know. We just don't know. The auditor may have an opinion, but I don't know what the chances are.
Slim, I think.
I'm probably more optimistic than the auditor is, but not much.
Auditors are not optimistic.
All righty, is there any more public comment? So, Richard, the action request is to adopt resolution which would approve this budget and set the tax rate. I don't know, do we want to,
What, you've had a suggestion from a member of the public to continue the hearing or have another opportunity for the public to comment. That's certainly within